Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of the Localization Fireside Chat and YouTube channel. My name is Robin Ayub. I'm your host and founder of this platform. And for those who aren't familiar with me, it's a pleasure to meet you. And if you'd like to get to know me a little bit better, you can get on LinkedIn and try to find me, and I'd love to connect and communicate with you. And also today, we have an exciting discussion for you, and I'm honored to be joined by Peter Reynolds. Peter is the co-CEO of memoQ. And Peter, as we say on this channel, everybody's got a little story about how they got into the localization industry, and your bio speaks for itself. You're a household name when it comes to the legacy that you built over the years in the industry, and you're a veteran of the industry. If you don't mind, the mic is yours. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about memoQ. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll start by telling you how I got into this industry. My original job was in social work, and I was working in a social housing project in Bradford, in England, in the 1990s, and I wanted to get to move back to Dublin, where I was from. I started looking for jobs there in a very primitive way, and compared to how you would do it this way, so that I had a newspaper posted to me once a week. I would scour through that, and I found a job for a company called Softtrans. I applied for it, and I ended up working for Softtrans in their office in Dunleary, in south of Dublin. The Softtrans is a really interesting company because it was the first company that said that it was selling something called localization, and this was all it did. It didn't do translation or whatever. It just was geared up towards selling a service that they called localization to technology companies. And at the time, there were some other people that did similar stuff, but they were the first one that this was exclusively what they did. And they built up quite a sizable company and eventually sold it to Berlitz. Then Berlitz sold it to Baun, and then Baun sold it to Linebridge. And all the same time, during all that, as the name on the door changed outside the office, I was sitting in the same desk working for different companies. And I started off by doing localization testing and localization engineering. And then I moved into development work. And I was very lucky with that because we were able to work with partners like Sistran to come up with innovative ideas. At the time, Sistran had a technology that they called Babelfish, which was the main machine translation service available on a web search platform called Vista. And they were getting something like 2 million jobs per day during this platform. Everybody at the time thought that was phenomenal. Obviously, now it's probably 2 million jobs per second that go through Google, but who knows? What we thought is that if 1% of these jobs would need a human translation, we would have a money-making venture. And we created something we called Berlitzit, and then waited and waited and waited and waited for a job. And we found that nothing happened, that it wasn't until one of the salespeople got in their car, went down to Microsoft and said, look, we've got a faster, easier way of you doing your work, where you just put this into a web platform and get it translated by us. Then we had a business. And by the time I think Baun was bought by Linebridge, this was a business worth something like $23 million per year and had 60% revenues, and it's still going. Linebridge have changed the name, they've improved the technology, they've optimized it. But essentially, the service has been going since before the end of the last millennium until now. After I left Berlin, Linebridge is based in a small town in Boston, Massachusetts called Waltham. And while I was living in Dublin, I left a company which was headquartered in Waltham, Massachusetts, for another company that was headquartered in Waltham, Massachusetts called Idiom. And I worked for them for about 3 years, which is quite an exciting time. Idiom had sort of hit a ceiling in terms of how they were selling their service, because it was really focused on the enterprise sale. And in order to do really well within technology in the translation sector, you have to think about translation companies and you have to think about translators. And they started off by thinking of the enterprise and thinking the enterprise would be the only way to do it. But when they realized that you needed translation companies involved, we started expanding quite rapidly. And many of these translation companies became really great partners to the company, brought in an awful lot of really useful insight and place to work for a couple of years. I left them when they got acquired by SDL. The technology is still being offered by SDL at the moment. And after I left them, 3 Hungarian language technology gigs approached me. And they approached me with about the worst offer I could possibly have got. The idea was that I could work with them for a whole year and they would pay me my expenses, but wouldn't actually pay me anything. Maybe at the end of the year, if we still had a company, you could have a share in it. And for some foolish reason, I said yes. And I found that my first job, at the time, this was memoQ, and at the time, they were all working part-time in the company, doing other things. And the first thing I had to do was to persuade them that they had something really good, which they had. They had the feeling that because they were a tiny Hungarian company, nobody was really interested in. I turned that on its head, by like in Hungary, for example, they had a lot of access to very well-educated workforce. At the time, and still to this day, we've got a connection with the people that came from the Technical University of Budapest. So you had people that were lecturing in software development in the morning, and in the afternoon were working on memoQ. One of them was even writing books with people at Microsoft and whatever on new platforms such as the .NET framework at the time and whatever. Anyway, we quickly looked at, we analysed the sector. We saw that all our competitors, and they weren't really competitors at the time because none of them knew we existed really, but they were all aiming for either enterprises or for translators. And the translation companies were being left alone. It was being expected that they would buy the same tool as the enterprises they were offering their services to, or that their translators would persuade them. So we set out to target this group, and we found, one of the problems with the enterprises or with the translation companies is they really know what they're doing. There will be somebody in any translation company, no matter how small, who is a language technology expert and will know before you walk in the door all the things that are wrong with your software. So it's a hard sell, but it was something that made us a much stronger company. We set out to sell to translation companies. We also set out to sell in Germany in particular, and the reason for that was something similar. Big translation technology companies like Trados, Across, Ontram, and whatever were all from Germany. And if we could sell in their backyard, we could sell anywhere. When we found we put ourselves the highest fence to climb, when we found we could climb that, we were in very good shape to grow later on. And we've continued to do this. We're a bootstrap company. We've been growing for 19 years. Last year, we grew by 22%. We're one of the largest players within the sector. We've got about 160 people working directly for us, and we still have partners such as the people that I met that originally started in the University of Budapest. So we're in very good shape. And what we do is sell translation technology, and it's a translation management system which project manager would use to manage their translation, but also a CAT tool which translator would use to do the translation. And our approach is to offer the best quality we can in that field.
Absolutely. And, thanks for that brief. I really appreciate it. You walking us down the from the beginning till now. And you really summed it up very nicely, like how you started, where you are, and the various transitions that you've been through, and then the various steps that you had to go through. Just for our audience, when you took on a job, as you mentioned earlier, with, hardly any salary, and they asked you to do, this job. So if somebody, it takes quite the guts to do that. It takes quite the courage to do that for people who are looking to move from point A to point B. You must have seen an opportunity and you said, you know what, there's an opportunity here. I'm willing to take the risk. Yeah. What is the advice that you would give the audience who are faced in a similar or typical challenge such as what you've just described?
Yeah, I wouldn't be advising people to jump for that. I think in retrospect there are probably better ways of doing it. Most most companies that are say new to the sector don't go down the funding route that we had. Have been entirely bootstrapped. We made our money from selling to customers and used that to grow the business. Most companies go down some sort of funding by VCs and whatever, and there's disadvantages to that. Like if you sell your part of your company to somebody at the earliest stages, they'll want an awful lot of the company for very little. So you need to have something where your family or your friends or somebody can help you to get to the first 6 months, 1 year, so that you've got a product and you've got a product that you can show to people. But the secret in all this is to believe in what you're doing. Like if you have a good idea and you know what you're doing and you're certain it's going to be a success, you're much more likely to be successful with it. The other thing to take into account in all this is a good idea is not enough. The idea, the technology, or whatever, not the important thing. The important thing is the customer. If you've got a good idea that needs a customer and you've persuaded actual people to buy this, that's or right. You've given them they've told you that you produce that and I will buy it. That's the important thing. The customer is where it starts, not the technology. Yeah, there's too many businesses.
What you're saying is very true. What problem are we trying to solve and how much is the customer willing to pay for it?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, also, since we are on the topic and we jumped directly into the memoQ current status discussion. And so what sets you apart? What sets memoQ apart, in your opinion, from the other vendors in the same space? And you mentioned earlier that Germany is a market where you're excelling against SDL as a competitor. Why do you think that is? What's the difference?
Well, the reference to Germany was, where we essentially learned to sell. And our reason for going for there was because they were at the time the most sophisticated market for what we had. And we would learn most by targeting that market. We target every market now. What sets us apart? memoQ is very much aiming for the premium translation market. We aim for the market where you need to have a quality translation product and you need to have a professional dealing with the translation and professional dealing with the project management. We don't particularly target where the workflow would be almost completely automated. In our target market, there always has to be a person in control. And one of the interesting things that we're seeing now with the advent of ChatGPT and whatever is people are learning the importance of that, the importance of having a person in control. I think prior to the ChatGPT interface being released, people had this vision that translation could be written almost completely automatically and it doesn't need to be checked and whatever. And also content would be written completely automatically and doesn't need to be checked. And, if you've heard the story about the lawyer in New York whom had 6 cases, all of which were on through, presented to a court in a case he was doing. You see the problems of not having a competent person in control. And the case for having, competent translators being in control is very much made for that. What we have been calling that augmented translation for some time. This is a phrase, I think the Common Sense Advisory people were the first ones to use that. We've been using that phrase for the last 4 or 5 years. But again, with the advent of ChatGPT, suddenly everybody is talking about that, or hybrid working, where part of it, the content, is generated, in our case, by machines that do neural machine translation, in other cases by artificial intelligence, by large language models. But you do need a competent professional. The better content you get out there will because you have a competent professional either translating or, in the case of large language models, dealing with the content that comes from that.
Now, on the CAT tool, I guess CAT tools have their evolution, and they've been seeing a lot of evolution recently, especially as you mentioned earlier, and the hybrid model that we always going to be existing in, that technology and human going to have to coexist for a long time. Obviously, technology will continue advancing and evolving, and we'll see where that goes. Yeah. Not much talk has been given, and I'd love to ask you this question on the project management side. The modules that you guys from memoQ provide to the industry on the project management side, has there been, in your opinion, advancement? What's the status, I guess, on that one? Have we done everything we could do as an industry to advance that project management layer, if you will?
I don't think so. There's an awful lot to be done. In memoQ, for example, you can have a completely automated workflow. The way we try to have it is that the project manager gets involved when there's something which would benefit them, or would benefit by them bringing their expertise. But we call them project templates in memoQ, but essentially it's an automated workflow. And many of the things that people did in the past that were quite complicated, like, for example, if you have a new document going through memoQ that the project manager is dealing with, it usually automatically takes the best 90-95% matches from a TM, and if it hasn't got any matches for a particular segment, it will go to their favorite machine translation and get a segment from that. And that's all automatic, and that's all out of the box, and it's almost old hat at this stage because we've been doing that sort of thing for quite some time now. But the way it is now is that all those various parts that we've been doing for some time are all added together, and that the project manager sees everything and can control it. They can write rules to automatically assign translators. If you're a translation company and you've signed, you can say you get work for L'Oreal or something, and you sign it to a particular translator. If the customer is happy with that, has been very happy with that, it makes sense to sign it to them again. And that will automatically happen. You can organize that to happen within memoQ. There's other areas where we're improving. memoQ is probably a language-orientated TMS, in that many of the tools that we have for project managers also relate to the language thing. We've been improving how we deal with translation memories, and I think we're the only company that is working on that. Many people have accepted that translation memories have gone as far as they can, and we didn't, and we've now released a new translation memory. It's going to be a slow release because it's a major technology change, and we are cautious about that sort of change. We don't want people to end up with problems. But we've just released TM Plus. What that is a much more scalable TM. For example, if the project manager or the company they're working with wants to use their TMs in say with an NMT, a neural machine translation engine that they're working with. The TM Plus engine will make that much easier because it's a much more scalable, much faster TM engine than we previously had or our competitors have previously had. And, it's an example where fixing problems, one thing in the areas of, TMs, improving how they work, can end up with benefits in another area, such as how TMs could be reused in other settings, such as with neural machine translation or with other sort of, like large language models, whatever you might use them for.
Which leads me to, just to take that step further, I guess, on the TMS side, everybody I talk to, our industry is based on customers. We're a service industry, right? So,
yeah.
And that customer interface, that relationship with the customer is very, very important. And it seems to be, to a large extent, to me at least, still relies on Outlook communication, emails, sending emails to the customer, exchanging messages with customers.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, my background, I'm not sure if you knew that, but my background is software, right? So I'm a technologist by background. And back in the late 90s, excuse me, I was working for a company called Genesis, still around. They got bought by Avaya, et cetera, later. And we wrote back in the late 90s, and we used to develop systems for call centers. We wrote logics and programs to allow us to read an incoming email, and that's at the beginning of emails at the top. Read an incoming email, decipher what's inside of that email, go to the database. If somebody does say, example, I'm checking on my order. We take the order number, we go to the database, we look at the database, see what's the status of that order, come back, formulate an email, and send it back to the customer, and it would look to that customer that they got the information they need immediately. They didn't have to wait for it, a week for somebody or 2 days for somebody to respond to them. I don't know what the wait time is nowadays for somebody to respond to a customer. But I find that ability today with AI and the information that we've got and the database structures that we currently have, it's much easier to do these things versus, back 20 years ago. What's your thoughts on the customer facing side of things?
Yeah, I think there's a whole, a whole other program for you. I think you're right. The only thing I would suggest is that you were probably less likely to make mistakes using the technology of 20 years ago, and what you were describing, you probably just wouldn't get things wrong. While with LLMs and whatever being, artificial intelligence being used by that, there's a good chance that you make mistakes.
True.
I think that the interaction that, the real people that are using our software, and it's good to actually work with them. One of the things that we do is we've got a support team that's staffed by actual people. You get an automated response instantly, but within about 30 minutes, you'll probably have a real person checking something on this. And our thinking, and this has been the thinking with memoQ since the beginning, was that if things that could cause people to, if a translator is working, say, in the middle of the night or in a different time zone, and they stop working for an hour, that could be, the loss of them, the companies they're working with, a whole range of people. And it may not have any reason for it other than the fact that nobody saw what was wrong and sent them a quick email that tells them what the fix was. And we've always had this approach to try and get a real person onto it immediately. I get what you're saying. We do use technologies we use a technology called telemetry to try to find out what people are doing with the software, to try to improve on how they're using it. If, for example, we find that people are doing strange things with the software, it takes them 10 minutes to do it while there's a 2-minute way of doing it, we'll make sure they know about it. So we collect information on that, and that is quite easy now because the companies that create the tools to write the software, like Microsoft, provide kits to do this. And that's what we're doing. We're using software to find out what people are doing with their consent, because the consent issue is hugely important, and rightly so. But we've got people's consent for getting some information back, and with that, we can optimize their performance. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that answer. I really appreciate it, Peter. Just switching gear on you a little bit, if you don't mind. I noticed that you have a lot of involvement with the ISO standards. You took part of the establishment of the XLIF, et cetera. If you don't mind, explain to the audience what was your role, and how did that impact you, and the learning that you've taken from this, and you applied it in the various steps of your career.
Yeah, I became involved in XLIF at the beginning of the project, which was this was a project that happened in Dublin. Our bosses wanted to play golf with each other, and they had to have a reason to play golf with each other. So they got a group of clever people together, put them in a room and said, come up with something clever. And because they, had decided that they could then play golf without a guilty conscience. So anyway, in this room, there was people I was from Berlitz, there was somebody from Moravia, and mainly big software companies like IBM, Novell, Sun Microsystems, Oracle, Microsoft. And when we looked at all the problems we had, we decided the biggest problem was file interchange, that each of these localization publishers had hundreds, in some cases thousands of file formats that had to be localized. And what we were hoping is that instead of having those hundreds and thousands of different file formats, we'd have one. And what we discovered very quickly is there was a man called Yves Saboral, whom used to work, he worked for Lasso and various other companies. And I think Lasso is now part of Argus Translation, where he's now working. But Yves Saboral has been involved in pretty much every technology standard that localization industries come up with. And he had developed an XML vocabulary called OpenTag. So what XLIF was OpenTag version 2.0, and we quickly developed it. We got some success about this. In the pre-localization world days, Ulrich Hennes had a conference called the Localization Institute Conference, and we announced it there. And then we decided that we needed somewhere to live. And we went to Oasis and found this quite remarkable because until this point, we'd always been complaining that the localization part was the poor relation in terms of, say, software or whatever. It was always being ignored. And what we found within Oasis was that the CEO of Oasis would be coming to our committee and saying, look, we've got these other people here that deal with this content format called DITA, and we think they need to talk to you. We think localization is really important to that. And I think we all benefited from this conversation. I think they developed this in a very nice way that takes into account localization. And some of our colleagues in that committee got very involved with that. But there was also the advantage that because Oasis was publishing it, everybody treated it very seriously. And at one stage, XLIF was being used as a format outside of localization for the early versions of Android. Were using it to help them with some of the user interface for their applications, which was quite strange, but it showed the power of having a big standards organization totally backing us. And, we've seen almost every company come up with their own XLIF standard. Anybody who's doing any sort of, if you're doing some translation from Adobe or from Oracle or from whatever, they will send it in XLIF. All of the companies that provide technology for the translation industry use XLIF as an interchange format. And the whole thing's been incredibly successful and it's still going quite strong. And I'm not involved with it at the moment. The only thing I do for the XLIF committee is that XLIF is now an ISO standard, and I guide it through there. What I did in ISO, I was the project editor for a project called ISO 17100, which was interesting, a very interesting translation standard because it specified a translation product where you had to have the translation done by a professional translator and then revised by somebody with the same experience. And this was a very strong product that many of the companies within our industry still sell and they still use as a benchmark. And it's, I think, been really good for our industry to have this benchmark with the ISO name on it. So I'm still somewhat involved with all these projects, mainly with ISO. I'm very much a supporter of standards. I think they've done a lot of good. It may be the case that sometimes we've got two standards do the same thing and we should retire one. But that can be quite difficult because there are people behind all these things, and it's
every standard has its own, I want to say, collection of people that they support that particular standard. They feel so strongly about it. But, for the audience, this is, absolutely amazing to be talking to Peter about XLIF. XLIF for our industry is like the cornerstone of our industry in terms of the file standards, how we exchange data, how we exchange information in our industry between companies, etc. So
it's about 25 years old.
That's right.
It's 25 years since people have been using it in commercial applications. I think the Berlitz portal that I mentioned at the beginning was one of the first. What they had is that they had a connection to a Lotus tool called Domino Workbench, where you could send a file using web services to XLIF, using XLIF to Berlitz, get it translated and send it back. And that was in the last millennium.
No,
1998 or something.
That's right. Just from my, for our audience here, and there's a lot of interest around the company, memoQ. I know you have a lot of users. You've got a lot of interest out there. And you mentioned earlier in the conversation that you've sold or you sell currently memoQ to the service providers, and there's like 19,000 translation company out there, or approximately 19,000 translation company, according to the research that I've seen in the past few weeks. It's 18,600 something. I can't remember the exact number, but in around that number. You also, I've noticed, and I know a few of your teams here in North America that they work with memoQ, and I understand that you also sell to regular businesses like a bank or a pharmaceutical company or whoever is interested in buying it. So, in your opinion, is there a difference in the growth area for memoQ? Would you see this sector growing versus the other sector, or how do you view that now?
At the moment, for the last few years, we've been growing far stronger with enterprises. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things with this is that the translation companies are very mature users in terms of technology. They realized quite some time ago that they needed this technology in order to survive. They also, know the various tools out there. Sometimes they use them all. Sometimes they just use one tool like ours. Mm-hmm. But what we're seeing at the moment is that enterprises are becoming far more educated about how they're working with translation. And we're seeing more and more of them use our software. At the moment, about 48% of our customers are either enterprises or government organizations, while about 40% are translation companies and the rest are individual translators.
It's very good to see the diversification in your book of business, the split between enterprise and service providers. I'm assuming it gives you that business flexibility in how you decide to move forward in your business and your software development.
Yeah, and it's also something that one of the things we did by design is we looked at the the companies that were in the translation space, and we looked at what caused them problems. And one of the, with Bound Global Solutions, for example, they used to have very successful years when Microsoft had a new release of Microsoft Office or something. And then if there was a year when Microsoft didn't have a release of Microsoft Office or whatever, they would have a difficult year. Mm-hmm. And so what we did from the very beginning is set out to have a very diverse user base, very diverse customer base, and also to have a lot of customers. We've got some very big customer, but there's no customer that's got more than 2% of our revenues.
Now, for our audience who are listening and are either your users or potential users, can you give us what's next for memoQ? What are they should be watching out for, and what should they get excited about when they take a look at either the next release or the next 3 months, or however you want to put that? So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the TM Plus release is something that's very important. This is a major change to how we deal with translation memories, much more scalable, higher performance, and so on. And we've released that at the moment. We're not suggesting that everybody goes automatically and just runs with it, because it is a major technology change and there may be some issues. But over the next year, that will become our default TM. We're also improving the process. One of the things that many customers are saying is a big issue for them is in-country review. And we've been improving our process with that, and that's hugely important. Obviously, like everybody else, we're looking at what happens with artificial intelligence, and we want to improve that. We're quite a hyperverse company. We don't want to tell you that we've got something that will change your life and make you incredibly good looking and totally. But what we do want to do is to provide real value. And our approach to AI is with this. We don't want to hype anything. We don't want to have something that's just almost a gimmick to have. We want to make sure that it's got real value. And we're doing a couple of things. At the moment, there is an integration with ChatGPT that's available through one of our partners, Intento. We are working, we've developed integrations with two tools, one created by Taos and the other created by ModelFront, which deal with AI-based quality estimation. And they're quite powerful tools because they provide the sort of quality estimate that you had with the fuzzy matching and whatever you get in a translation memory. They provide that for MT. And both tools are really spectacular. The Taos tool does this in a generic way, and the ModelFront does it with your own data. And we're excited to work with both these partners. We're working to figure out how large language models and related technologies will be used within memoQ. On the one hand, we're going to have it there so that you've got it as a search, that you can search for a term within a tool like ChatGPT or whatever, in the same way you can currently use a web search within memoQ. What we're trying to do is to make it so that you've got the most powerful tools and very easy to reach. And they're just some of the things that we're looking at. With memoQ, we've got a legacy of very important. We've almost forgotten some of the things that could really, are really powerful. And we also we'll be planning to revise them over the coming year or so. For example, LiveDocs is something that I think nobody else has got a corpus memory within their tool. It's probable that corpus memory becomes much more relevant in how you deal with, say, output that comes from a large language model, because it'd be a good way to align them on the fly. If, for example, you've got output that's in two different languages or more, you could line them all on the fly using a corpus memory. And we've got that technology there. We're working to improve on it. We're working to bring in the new TM engine's very important. How we're dealing with technology, with processes such as in-country reviews, very important. I think our approach to AI is one that's really focused on real customer value rather than telling you it's magic.
Yeah, I know it's the buzzword right now, and everything that we hear, every discussion that you enter into, it seems that everybody wants to talk about, the latest advancement in AI and Chat GPT and the machine translation. And I think from a customer perspective, from the user or the consumer of the translation services that we ultimately all provide to the economies around the world is, I want it, it gives them the access to have services that they're relatively free. And the second thing is the speed which by they obtain the most people who are translating these contents cannot judge the quality of that content. So they take it at face value many times. This is okay. It looks to be whatever that language that I'm translating into, so it must be good. Which if you take and I did that, I take a scan across many conversations that I've had. It's contributing, like, these technologies in their current state, and I'm sure improvement will come down the road. In their current state, it's greatly contributing to taking the quality down a little bit. If you imagine the quality as a curve, instead of stabilizing going up, I think it's taking it down a little bit, because just that democratization of the tools, I guess, and making them available to everybody, and everybody now, like, I want it now, I want it fast, and probably if I can download an app and get it done, it's okay with me too. And normally people see as you mentioned earlier in the case of the lawyer who got disbarred in New York, to using those free tools, and not necessarily injecting a human in validating those tools, you normally end up in a trouble. And we've seen some evidence here, in Canada. I think it was one of the retail chains here where they were playing on the word of the greatest of all time, the football theme, World Soccer, I guess, and the word actually was translated into an actual goat, not GOAT. It's actually translated into a goat. So you'd see there's some of those you cannot escape if it's going to the public eye. If it's internal consumption, fine, you can judge that if you want to, but if it's going to the public, it's going to come back. And encourage people to play that carefully, and you're right, decipher the hype from reality, and make sure you take what is advantageous to us as a businesses, as service providers, etc. So one of the things I want to talk about is, as you look ahead, and I know it's a philosophical question, sorry about that one. If you look ahead for our localization industry, in my opinion, started 10,000 years ago. And in the, I don't know if they can trace it all the way back to the Babylon day, but let's assume it started there. But what do you think it's going to happen as technology continue to evolve, continue to get better, and the cycle of developing technology is getting shorter? So one of the conversations we've had is said, okay, well, let's take a look at a year down the road. Well, it's not a year down the road. We're talking about a month, 2 months down the road in terms of how technology is evolving, because development cycle, and you're in the software development, you probably can attest to that. The development cycle has gotten shorter as well, so which contribute to the evolution.
The first thing to say is that the talk of the demise of the translation industry has happened before. At one stage, translators used to speak into a dictaphone, and they would have a number of typists who would hear their tape and would type it, and they thought the personal computer could destroy the industry. When that happened, when CAT tools came in, people thought it would destroy the industry by lowering the quality and whatever. I think it's going to be, there will be changes. I think what we've been saying to people for some years, that augmented translation is where it's going. And by that I mean you will have better suggestions from different things, but you need to have, a really well qualified, well experienced person in charge and have somebody in control. One of the funny things with the changes in technology up to this stage is that they never seem to increase the number of words that people translated per day. I saw a retirement speech by Brian Kelly, who created this company, SoftTrans, many years ago. And he said when he started in the translation industry, translators could do 7,000 words per day, and now they can do 2,000.
Seems that we have gone backward. Is that your point?
Well, I'm not saying that, but using dictaphones plus somebody typing was a very powerful way of producing a lot of words. I think we need to be careful. We are actually making progress. Mm-hmm. And there are certain things we need to be very careful of. We need to make the case that it needs a professional translator dealing with certain types of content. If your mother is going in for an operation and the machine was created in Germany, you want to make sure that the surgeon has read a manual that's been translated by a competent professional and that hasn't just been machine translated, no one checked. And in the United States, it's actually illegal. It's against the law to have text for that sort of thing that has not been checked by a competent professional translator. I think we will see different jobs come out of it. I don't know what these jobs will be. I would caution anybody who believes that things are happening at a rate of months, that maybe it's not quite as simple as that. For example, GPT in ChatGPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. They have had this technology for probably the last 5 years. What happened last November is that OpenAI put a simple interface on it and released it to the public, and the public wrote in, make me I'm having friends to dinner, what should be the menu? One of them is from Germany, one of them is from, it's just a nice menu, and it came up with nice menus. And that's great, but the technology hasn't been quite the roller coaster that the hype suggested it is. The people working in those areas are very serious scientists who put an awful lot of work in it. And I think ultimately it will end up with a technology that will be of use to people. Mm-hmm. I see those things as being ways of, not with every translation workflow, but with some particular workflows, it'll probably be the case that LLMs large language models will be the best way to provide new content. But there should be competent people in control of what they do. And the most competent people to control language output in different languages in a multilingual setting are translators.
So, no, I appreciate that. And you have a very valid point around the people need to be careful and those technologies. And I agree with that. As I've been in the industry for 21 years, I've seen the technologies that everybody was threatened by, and we're still here. And the idea that, one magic wand type of a solution for our multi-diverse industry in terms of number of languages, number of texts, and the type of text, and the number of demographics that you need to cover, it's a pretty large task for humanity to take on. I think it's going to be many years to come, and we'll continue to coexist with machine-assisted work. I mean, we use software in every aspect of our lives nowadays, and specifically on the translation side of things. No, I want to thank you for your insight on this one. I know we're coming up on the hour. I still have two more items for you. One is, from your vantage point, what is your advice to professionals in our industry as the industry is going through what they're going through right now? And the first advice I'm guessing here is that, don't believe the hype. That's what I'm hearing from you. But what is your? You've been a veteran of the industry. You've seen so many things have gone in the industry, changes, etc. You've been through so many companies. What's your advice to professionals in our industry? Not
so much don't believe the hype, but don't be scared of it. I think it's important. Technology is meant to work for people, not the other way around. This isn't we don't live in some sky fiction where, like, do androids dream of electric sheep or whatever. We don't live in that sort of Blade Runner type scenario. We have to be in control. And the technology that's around is changing. It's important to know what it is, what it does. My suggestion is don't be scared of it, but it's meant to work for you, not you work for it. You should figure out how you can get these technologies to best work for you, how they can improve your working, how they can make your business more optimal. And I think that's the way to look at it. Try and make them work for you.
That's right, not the other way around. Absolutely. Just I want to thank you so much for being part of this conversation, Peter. And before I wrap it up, if you have a few words that you'd like to say to your audience, to our audience, and the floor is yours again.
Well, I just like to thank you. I'd like to thank your audience, and I'd like to hope that they have a very inquiring, curious approach to this. And I think our industry is a very unique, it's maybe similar to many others, but it's made up of a lot of wonderful people with great ideas and whatever. It's a good place to be. It'd be good if they approach it with an open heart and have fun while they're working. So thank you very much, Robin, and hopefully we'll meet in person sometime soon. Take care. Thank you.
I would love to meet you in person. I know we worked together, but we never had a chance to meet. I'd love to, at some point, to meet you in person and shake your hand and say hello. Again, to the audience, I want to thank you and thank everybody for watching this episode. And if you have any comments on today's episode, on everything we've chatted about, please send us an email or put it in the comments, or however you'd like to reach out to us. We're open for your suggestions, comments, and questions. Thanks again for everybody, and enjoy your rest of your day.